Alright, what's poppin', people? We're back. And you know what? I took like about a half a week off of actually uploading because I'll be honest. After the stream that we did, which if you have not looked, I mean, look, it's uploaded. We solo ran through Pokemon Emerald with a Mudkip. That was absolutely terrible. Anyhow, I took a break for a good bit of time after doing that because my throat was very unhappy after having to speak for that long. And I'll keep it honest, I've been dealing with some general pain. I've got, you know, my early 20s still, and I've got, you know, around that age, wisdom teeth. I've got only one that's grown in, but it's like jamming into the side of my mouth right now, and that's not very pleasant. And I've also been dealing with some other body pain. Anyhow, needed some time to recuperate. But we're back, and I wanted to do one of these lovely little Pokemon Spotlight videos because they're entertaining. And when I was thinking about Pokemon to do, I realized we actually just hadn't talked about Bronzong yet in the kind of capacity that, you know, we do one of these videos. You know, I'm sure in the VR update, I talked about it for a good amount of time because it's an S-rank mon that's here. But I think because it's an S-rank, it deserves literally its own entire video. We did one for Otomo, and now I think it's a good time to go for Bronzong. Now, Bronzong is what you sometimes hear people refer to in these lower tiers as a real steel type. Now what do I mean by that? So, what constitutes a real steel type? Well, a real steel type, and you generally talking about these through like the lens of a defensive one, is a steel type that actually performs like a steel type should. So, think back to UU earlier this gen, where its steel type situation was actually just identical to NU's, where you had Bronzong, Copperajah, and Escavalier as like the top three. I don't think any of them at the time were referred to as real steel types. And the reason for this was because the most problematic Pokemon in that tier, ones that you would want ones that you would want a steel type to actually handle, so you're talking like Noivern, Offensive Sylveon, that type of deal, they didn't handle. Now, I will say this, Heatproof Bronzong would be Noivern, so I'm not I guess it just wasn't running Heatproof. Regardless, when we talk about real steel types, we're basically talking about steel types that can actually defensively answer Pokemon you'd expect a steel type to, without just getting pretty quickly overwhelmed. So, for NU, what are steel types that aren't real? What do we call a fake steel type? Duraludon. That is a fake steel type. It is a fake dragon type as well, but it's a fake steel type. It doesn't actually beat anything other than, like, when you think about when it was at its peak, really the only mod that I would talk about it beating down efficiently was Ninjask. That was it. Now, it could take advantage of some other passive Pokemon if you ran a lot of bulk investment as well. I think Weezing is the one that should immediately come to mind here. I'm thinking back to when I passed, or, I don't know, did I pass? No, but when I brought up the idea, that was it. I brought up the idea for Joey during Snake Draft to use Sub-Iron Defense Duraludon. You know, we were able to EV it to have its substitute never get broken by Weezing's Flamethrower. And you know, that's an example of Duraludon doing something it should. But I mean, please tell me when Duraludon is ever going to check something like, say, a Noivern or a Sylveon. You know, it doesn't. And then again, we talk about it, how it's a fake dragon type too. Yeah, Duraludon doesn't check fire types. But when we look at NU right now, why do we call Bronzong a real steel type and then maybe throw some shade at the other options? Well, Bronzong could sort of keep up with Celebi, for instance. Bronzong can check not Copper. Oh yeah, Bronzong can check Copperajah, although that wasn't the one I meant to say. Bronzong can check Tyrantrum. Bronzong with Heatproof can check Goodra. You get where I'm going here, right? Heatproof Bronzong is legitimately just the best defensive Pokemon in the tier, because there's not a lot of stuff that immediately overwhelms it just on the spot. Heatproof is really nice, not only because you remove a weakness, but it's because in doing so, so many Pokemon that would otherwise get past you no longer have that easy means of doing so. Like, think Exploud. We mentioned Goodra, but think Exploud for a second. Overheat from Exploud just drops Copperajah, it drops a Scavalier. It does not do that to Bronzong. It does, I think, less than Boom Burst. Boom Burst is very fun. But, you know, Boom Burst is, like, barely ever a 3-hit KO. You have to max roll, I think, 3 times in a row. And so Exploud is no longer actually able to get past, you know, a Steel type with the move it would normally have. Now they do run Shadow Ball more nowadays, but like literally entirely for Bronzong. But you still do check it regardless. Think like Spec Sylveon. Mystical Fire it can't use Ursa, so it has to run Shadow Ball, otherwise it just does not break Bronzong. There's a lot of Pokemon in NU, or maybe not a lot, but a good amount of Pokemon would normally be able to pressure you, like even Salazzle or Florblitz Talonflame. Just thought those two are good mentions as well. A lot of Pokemon exist in NU that would otherwise be really good at taking down Bronzong, but because of what Heat Proof does for it, they're a lot less effective at doing it, or just pretty much unable to do it. And I think if we're going to talk about sets, and the disclaimer immediately is there's a lot of set versatility. I'll try to cover it as much as I can, but this mod's pretty versatile. If we're talking about sets, though, I think the one that's going to come to everyone's mind immediately, and the set that's actually gotten a couple people to say, hey, maybe Bronzong should be tested? I think there's at least one council member that feels that way. Is its Iron Defense set. And in particular, I think when we talk about Iron Defense Bronzong, a lot of people are looking at it as, like, rest Iron Defense. Now, again, I'm gonna go on a little tangent here. I do have 2 sets here. There's actually a fair bit of overlap between these sets, though. Like, you can run Stealth Rock Bronzong with Iron Defense, for instance. But I'm gonna try to separate them into 2 different ones here, just because I think that's easier to talk about. So, just so you're aware, that set exists, but we're gonna talk about them separate, just for convenience's sake. So, why is Iron Defense Bronzong so good? Well, I mean, look, Body Press is a really good move. But we would also just talk about what it does for Bronzong. A lot of Pokemon that you would want to try to overwhelm Bronzong with are physical attackers. When we get to the checks section, you'll notice that a lot of them are like, you know, Guzzlord. Actually, I did not put Guzzlord there, and it's entirely because of Iron Defense. So a lot of Pokemon that want to check Bronzong, though, are physical attackers still, right? Think about Dark types in the tier. Guzzlord, Drapion, 2 that immediately come to mind. Maybe you also think about Absol and Sneasel. The former 2 are the more important ones. Iron Defense basically just makes them ineffective. You know, unless you're a very bulky Guzzlord plus 2 Body Press, it does... I want to say it needs maybe just Stealth Rock to start threatening an Oko. Obviously, what to take from that is you do a lot of damage. But obviously, too, Drapion, you know, it can Sword Stance up versus you, but you Body Press it, you're doing like 80, or not that much, more like 70 to it. And now it's a lot less of a problem. And because Bronzong, when you're running this set, it means you've probably got like a Mudstyle on your team. You're not overly worried about giving Drapion that SD. You're fine with trading. And if they immediately knock, you still have Rest to help with longevity, so it's not the biggest deal. And I think also another just, like, expanding on the Rest point, this set functions a lot like Cresselia, I guess, is the best comparison I could make. We're going to look at a really just bulky win condition that doesn't have a lot of immediate power, but if you let it sit on the field for too many turns, it starts really threatening heavy progress against teams. Rest just lets you take advantage of so many Pokemon that otherwise maybe could outlast you, but end up being unable to do so just because you press Rest and it's like, okay, have fun. I think the 2 immediate ones that would come to mind are like Vaporeon and Sylveon. Vaporeon, it's contingent on a Scald Burn, of course. I think even you could list Mantine in that regard, like non-Haze Mantine, because Haze will always shut you down. But these Pokemon end up being ineffective at taking out Bronzong, because while they'd normally be able to just outlast its power points, take body presses relatively okay, and eventually remove it. Rest gives you, you know, those turns to just say, okay, I'm not doing anything. And so it gives Bronzong so much more leverage around these Pokemon. You know, sure, Sylveon takes like, what, 40 to 45, I think, for +6 body press? But it can still kind of stall you out of body presses if you're not careful about its, you know, playing around the sequences of Wish Tech. Vaporeon, if it gets a Scald Burn, well, sure, Heat Proof helps you take less damage of the burn, but then your body press does nothing. And then, of course, we talked about Mantine. Let's pretty much put those two together. And in Psychic, if we're talking about, like, this, what kind of, like, different adaptations do we see on this set in specific? I'm gonna list Psychic here, and I guess I should also note the EVs. There's gonna be some stuff here. Psychic, sometimes with, like, 40 special attack, I think it is good for just immediately getting rid of Salazzle. Psychic also helps versus a lot of other Pokemon. Vileplume, I think, is the big one, because without Psychic, Vileplume can sort of be annoying, at least for Bronzong. You know, obviously you can fish for Effect Spore, but also just growth of Vileplume is very obnoxious, you know. It can potentially set up alongside you. Yeah, Strength Sap doesn't lower the damage of your body press, but it still keeps Vileplume around. And then if you even just want to talk about, there's more utility-based Plume sets. And Corrosive Gas is kind of annoying. I'd say Psychic's a lot more relevant on the other Bronzong set, where you're using it more just as like a means of checking these Pokemon, not necessarily like worrying about can they hold my sweep. But I digress. What other moves do we see here? So Toxic's a big one. I'll just replace this here entirely with it. A lot of the answers to Bronzong, and we'll cover them more in depth later on, but they're going to be like ghost types, and then just other Pokemon that resist body press and still threaten a lot of damage in return. And while Toxic isn't enough for all of them, again, I'll go into more depth later with that, it still helps keep pressure on them on the immediate switch in, maybe, especially if you're just not going for game immediately with Bronzong. And that's, you know, that goes a long way in trying to set up your sweeps later on. I think you can even justify, say, there are a lot of ways you can justify. You can also justify Flash Cannon on here. It's not bad if Bronzong is your immediate means of dealing with Diancie. And obviously Diancie starts getting boosts from its Diamond Storm. It can start threatening you with a lot of damage and body press. So sometimes if your team really needs a way of beating up a Diancie that starts getting out of control, Bronzong is a good countermeasure to that. And as we mentioned again, the EVs here, the only real thing that I think you need is the 88 defense with a boosting nature. That allows you to avoid the 2-hit KO from, I believe, Tyranium's Head Smash. Or maybe it's avoid a 2-hit or a 3-hit KO, one of those two. Otherwise, the special defense stats mostly just like a dump. But as we said, like if you're running Psychic, it's like 40, it's like somewhere 40 or 48. You can do the damage calc yourself there, but it is helpful to EV for that if you're on Psychic. Again, just getting rid of Salazzle's really good. And some Lazzle variants go like Nasty Plot Overheat. And sure, Heat Proof means you're not weak to Overheat, but it's still a Salazzle, it's still really strong, and it's still a +2 stab attack. So if you get too weak, it can overwhelm you. So it's always nice to make sure that you can get rid of it in a heartbeat. Especially again, if you're running Bronzong without Psychic, Salazzle will just beat you down. I mean, if you just want to consider like a random arbitrary speed benchmark, I mean, you could probably justify hitting 108. And it's only 24 EVs. That gives you the jump on Mudsdale. And I think also even no speed Rhydon? No, Rhydon's 45. Mudsdale's, I believe. That'd be what, 35? Yeah, no, Rhydon's 40. Okay, cool. But that's like an okay investment. You don't really lose too much by dropping these EVs here. And I guess also one, you know, if you want to even talk about teammates real quick, so it's not too difficult. The big thing that this Bronzong set flourishes with is going to be those other Stealth Rockers. I mean, sometimes you need, you know, what Bronzong does alongside those Pokemon. I don't even say. I don't know why I said that. I'm so sorry. But Bronzong's really good alongside something like, say, Mudsdale. And naturally, if you run Rocks Mudsdale, then you open up this Bronzong set. And they generally have pretty good defensive synergy. If you're just thinking about Mon with good special bulk, pair with Mon with really good physical bulk. And Mudsdale handles a lot of those physical dark types, even some of the physical ghost types, like Golurk, to varying degrees of success. Which is really cool. And also, like, Clerics. Heal Bell Sport's really good to wake you up. You can run Chestoberry. I've done it before. It was on, like, a really Poltergeist weak team, and I wanted, like, some random way of maybe BSing my way past something like a, you know, maybe a Decidueye. But, it, you know, it's not the best. And we've even seen, like, if you're feeling truly demonic, Trick Toxic Orb to cripple things with, like, Natural Cure or to cripple Xatu. I don't think this is very good in general, but it is occasionally seen, so I think it's worth mentioning. Anyhow, it wouldn't be talking about Bronzong if we didn't mention Stealth Rock as well. Stealth Rock Bronzong is just generally one of the more consistent rocker options. Not necessarily because it defeats our means of hazard removal, because honestly it's kind of not good into a lot of them. I mean, you think about like Rotom-Mow, if it's Nasty Plot plus Defog, then that can be kind of annoying. If you think about Xatu, you literally do not get Stealth Rock up versus it ever. So that's kind of rough. Talonflame, if you do beat random Defog Talonflame, which is good. But most of the appeal is just that, hey look, Bronzong, it offers a lot just through its typing and other defensive traits in general. So like, if you need to run it as your rocker, not a big deal. I mean, when you look at the competition, you're mostly looking at like Diancie, Copperajah, and Mudsdale. Those are going to be the main things that you're trying to justify using Rocks Bronzong over. I'd say Rocks Bronzong. I mean, Bronzong just gets a lot of its utility, I think, through how annoying it is to take down and contend with once it starts boosting with Iron Defense. That's kind of why you don't see this set as much anymore, I'd say. And without Iron Defense, you are just a lot more vulnerable to certain things like, say, Drapion. Because you can't try to, you know, boost up and give yourself that little extra bit of bulk to take on those hits from it. Or even, like, other Stealth Rockers, like, I don't know, say Copperajah, if they run Earthquake. Because, you know, again, Bronzong doesn't really run Levitate too much right now. So sometimes you'll see Earthquake on Copperajah just because they'll be like, yeah, no, you aren't immune to this, don't think you're slick. Or, obviously, say something like a, Rhydon, which isn't super common, but sees at least a little bit of use. Mudsdale's a lot more problematic. But the set still generally fits well on certain balance builds. Like, you're talking about cores of, like, Bronzong alongside other mons like, say, Talonflame, Rotom-Mow, Sylveon, Vaporeon. Those types of mons, it still just pairs really well with. And of course, you know, since Wish support is so easy to just pair with it, it's not like this mod is going to be dying anytime soon, so it'll stick around pretty much throughout most of the game, and just keeping up rocks. I mean, there is something to say about a Pokemon that is really hard to take down, and letting you ensure that you can always try to force up rocks at some point in the game. I think it's about all I want to say about the actual, like, sets themselves. I mean, there's just not much to say about Levitate, right? Like, yeah. It's a move that you can run on Bronzong. And I mean, I guess on this Bronzong set as well, there's a lot more you can do with the actual attacks. I mean, you mentioned Flash Cannon on the Iron Defense set, that still applies here. But like, I've seen moves like Heavy Slam as well if you need help against Combine Sylveon. I've seen Earthquake because it still hits Copperajah. Like, I've seen Earthquake Toxic Protect Stealth Rocks like this. Because it still hits Copperajah, but it also still hits Dragalge and Salazzle. There's a lot, like, this set does have a good amount of, like, variance to it that I think is worth considering. lot of it's just kind of, you know, look at your team, what do you need, how can you adjust the movesets, because since you're not, you know, I think this set is a little bit more constrained because you're pretty much mandated these 2 moves, and then you really want rest. There's only one slot to really kind of try to BS your way around certain things. Whereas with this set, I mean, look, you run rocks and then have fun. You're pretty much always running toxic as well, but hey man, 2 slots, that's more than 1. Anyhow, if we're talking about counterplay, like we mentioned earlier, ghost types are going to be the main source of them. Something like Decidueye is especially problematic for Bronzong because they do run specs. Not as frequently anymore, but a Specs Decidueye obviously does bypass Bronzong's defense boosts, and it just drops it with a Shadow Ball. Even Choice Banded variants, though, are really problematic, because Poltergeist is just so strong, it doesn't really matter. And in Golurk's in that similar vein, where it's like, I don't care if you have defense boosts, my Poltergeist is going to do 12 million to you, and at the very least, you will not be threatening to sweep me afterwards, even if you throw off that Panic Toxic. Palisade's an interesting one. Palisade's been like getting a little bit more usage lately, in part just because NU's not got a whole bunch of ground types actually in the tier, so people are willing to more, you know, they'll experiment with some alternatives in lower tiers. And I mean, Palisade, like if you just run like some boring Stealth Rock set, yeah, you just hit it with Shadow Ball or Earth Power twice if you are gonna just assume no Levitate, and you're pretty fine to just get it out of the way. And of course, you know, I think back to Mary Berry playing Aim for the Battle of the Week thing, where she had a Specs Palisade. Yeah, if you're on Specs, then yeah, you immediately get through Bronzong as well. Now, I did talk about some Pokemon that have ways around Bronzong that can complicate some of the techs you run for it. So Valley Ghost is one of them, because I think the most common set is going to be something like this. This is, you know, there's some variety here. We're talking about like sub-Sword Stance. And so if you throw out your Silvally Ghost, you block a body press, and you sub up, Bronzong doesn't do anything to you. Like if it's Psychic, then you already don't care about Toxic anyway, but without another attacking move, you just take it for setup fodder. And then you're in a really, really, really good spot. And Celebi is kind of similar in that regard. Now this is where I guess the utility of Trick Toxic Orb would come into play, but Natural Cure does definitely help Celebi out. In that regard, you can switch in to Bronzong if it's at +2. You do have Recover to keep yourself healthy, and even if it poisons you, you can always switch out and heal it off with Natural Cure. Celebi's also great, of course, because boosting with Nasty Plot just means you get through Bronzong that much more easily. I have seen some people mention even running Earth Power on Celebi lately. Obviously that takes good advantage of Bronzong pretty much trending away entirely from Levitate at this point, and actually being weak to ground now. That comes with its own opportunity cost. It's specific to the Guzzlord matchup, but it's not something that's unseen, and of course helps this matchup out a very hefty amount. Starmie's another one of those just offensive water types, or offensive psychic types I should say, that is pretty effective at taking on Bronzong. Now if it boosts up too much, and you have horrible luck landing Hydro Pumps, yeah. But Recover again, worth noting that it does just let you keep healthy, even if you have to trade some hits. Lets you come in later and do the same thing as Bronzong. Now, I mean, again, Xatu, if you do run into Trick Toxic Orb, the X button is located at the top right of your screen. But Xatu is one of the better answers to Bronzong, because you have slow pivoting with Teleport. You've got Rocky Helmet as the item 99.9% of the time, which helps force Bronzong to rest more frequently, and you can get switch-ins to Pokemon, say, like, you know, ones we mentioned earlier, like Golurk or Decidueye, that can come in and just immediately get through Bronzong, and really take advantage of that mon being forced to sleep. You will never, like, you should almost never, I'll say. Never say never. You should almost never lose that interaction with Xatu, so long as you have a Pokemon that can actually come in and take out the Bronzong, which is pretty good. And in the last little category, I mean, again, we talked about these Pokemon earlier, and I'll even throw in Mantine here as well. But I mean, Sylveon, it at least bothers Bronzong's PowerPoint count, and eventually it will rest versus you. Vaporeon, if you fish for a burn, it's the same thing. It will rest versus you. And in Mantine, I mean, you resist Body Press and you have Scald. And you could potentially have Haze if you're feeling really, really paranoid about certain setup supers. So, it's workable. These are a lot less consistent, I would say, than the other mentioned Pokemon. But they're not out of the realm of possibility. And if you want to go further into it, there's other things too, right? Like Budsdale. And we want to talk about the fabled Earthquake 16 Adamant spread that they sometimes run. I can go like here real quick. Mudsdale. Inu defensive. That says 262. That's not what I meant. We got like Bronzong. And we see this. This has Levitate. That's unhelpful. Yeah, so you can see here, Earthquake's doing a hell of a lot. A hell of a lot. And even with Iron Defense boosts, Bronzong isn't really in a great position anyway. Earthquake is doing a whole lot. Again, if you don't have speed investment, which a lot of Bronzongs do not run any speed, Mudsdale's even just faster than you. So a lot of time what I've seen happen is you'll have a Bronzong try an Iron Defense up, a Mudsdale will come in, maybe they Iron Defense again, but Earthquake is actually like really heavily pressuring you into resting quite early on. So this isn't like, it's not a great form of counterplay, but it at least is kind of annoying. And then I mean, sure, Drapion and Guzzlord, they at least threaten to knock you. And without boosting, obviously, you know, that's really bad for Bronzong, and then you still going around more threatening. And if it's, I mean, if it's just the Stealth Rock set, then, yeah, they really don't care then. Guzzlord still does, because Body Press is doing big damage, but not the end of the world. I think that's about it for the Bronzong spotlight. This Pokemon has really solidified its spot in the metagame. And it's an interesting look back too, because, you know, not too many months ago, Copperajah was looked at as the de facto Steel type, and that's pretty much been flipped now. It's Bronzong's time now. And I hope you guys enjoyed this. As always, I mean, if you did, hey, drop a like, leave a comment. I like talking to y'all. Until next time, I hope you guys are enjoying today, and I'll see y'all then. Peace.